Welcome back to Bites of Pie. Today's video we're going to go over Lab7c Kickstarter test questions. This lab we're going to actually create a test generator. First off, we're going to be creating an abstract class called test question. So we'll create one, and it has two different items. It has a string variable that holds the test question, and an abstract method which reads in the question called read question scanner scan. So that starting off is fairly easy. I'm just going to create a new class called test questions, and we'll make it abstract. Alright, so we have an abstract class called test question. We want to create a protected string variable that holds the question. So we'll do that here. And we also want to create an abstract protected method called read question. So that's fairly simple. Create that, and remember to import javautil.scanner. Okay? So that was fairly simple. We created a test question. Now we're going to create two child classes called SA7 and multi-choice 7 that inherit from this test question. The SA7 will need to have an instance variable to store the number of blank lines, and multi-choice will need to have an array of strings. So I'll create this with you as well. So let's start off with creating an SA7c class. Now again, if you're using, you'll have to do this by hand if you're using JGrasp or another editor. But here you can actually say I want SA7 and I want to do it of type test question 7, and it does all the magic for you. I now have an essay question. I will need to create an instance variable to store the number of blank lines. So an integer to store how many blank lines. Okay. And we'll also need to create the read question and the toString. I'm going to need to override the toString. Okay. So I have the toString. Here, I'm going to return nicely formatted versions of the questions. So essentially, I'm going to have a variable. Remember my variable here. I need an integer to store how many blank lines. I'm going to need, and I have the string question over here. I'm going to need to print out in the toString. I'm going to need to create a string. I'm going to need to create a string and add on the question variable. I'm going to need to loop through. I'm going to need to loop through and add a blank line for every new blank line I've stored. So if I've stored 5, so whatever my variable is here, I'll need to loop through that many times and create a blank line and concatenate it to the string. And then finally, I'm going to need to return the string. Okay? So you can do that on your own. Secondly, we're going to implement read question. So we'll need to implement read question for an essay. So your input file is coming in from your scanner.scan. Your input file will look something like this. The first number or the first line in the file will tell you how many questions there are. Then each question will either start with an E for an essay question or an M for a multiple choice question. And each of those questions, if it's an essay, it'll read in the number of blank lines after the essay and then the essay question. So it'll read in the number of blank lines and then the essay question. Or if it's a multiple choice, it'll read in the number of possible multiple choice answers, the question, and because I said there was 4 answers, it'll read the next 4 lines will be the possible answers. So ultimately, when we print this out, we'll print it out nice and formatted, and it should look something like this, where I have an essay question with blank lines, a multiple choice with the multiple choice answers, and an essay question with enough blank lines, and so on. So getting back to the essay read question, I'm going to need to read in the number of blank lines, and then I'm going to need to read in the essay question, and I'm going to store that. So I store question in, I'll scan in the number, and then I'll scan in the question. Okay, and that's what essay 7c will look like. Same thing with the if I wanted to do with a multi-choice, I'll create a new multi-choice object, inheriting off of the test question object. And I also want to implement the toString. So again, I want to do what I'm doing up here. I need to do the toString and the read question. So here in the toString for multiple choice, I'm going to want to create a string with question and a new line. I want to loop through the answers and concatenate. So I'm going to add the questions to the string. Hopefully it looks something like this. So I'm going to have like a tab. So I want the string to have the question, new line, maybe a tab, and then loop through the possible answers. Add a tab, add the number and the answer, another number and another answer. Note, every time I want to concatenate to the answer, there should be a number. So it'll be like tab, then you'll want a counter to make sure that you're counting up. And then finally, when you got the entire string, I'm not system out print lining them. I'm adding them to a string. So I'm continually concatenating to the string, and then I finally return the string in the method. As far as the read question, I'm going to want to read in the number of answers. So I'm going to need to read in an integer of 4. I'm going to need to read in a question, and then I'm going to loop. So now that I have the number of answers, I'll know that I'll have to loop that many times and start reading in my list. Oh, and I forgot one last thing is up here I need to create multi-choice. Will need an array of strings, so I'll probably need to create an array array list of strings for answers, and then I'll need to loop through those and add those to the list. Finally, I'm going to need to modify my run test class to print this stuff out. So it's down here, the run test 7c. I'm going to need to read in the number of questions. So here I've already got the scanner. I'm going to need to have some sort of logic that will read in my number of questions. I'll do that with you here. So I will need to read in the integer number of questions. That'll give me my 3. And then I'll need to loop through. Well, first off, I'll need to create a list of test questions to make sure that I'm going to create a new test question, whether it's a multiple choice or an essay, and add it to it. I'll need to loop through that number of questions. So if I specified, I said there's going to be 3 questions total in my test. I'm going to need to loop through those that many times, and I'll need to scan in the question type. First, I'm going to scan in the question type. I'm going to determine. I'll have an if statement. Maybe I'll create a new question called quest. If the type is E, I want to create a new SA7C object for quest. Otherwise, I'll need to create a multi-choice object and assign it to quest. Then I'm going to need to call the read question function of the test of this question and pass in scanner, so that it will scan the appropriate piece in And then finally, I'll need to add this new variable to my list here. Okay. So here I am, I'm looping through, I'm creating either multi-choice or essay questions, and then I'm going to add it to the list. Lastly, I want to loop through the test and system out print line the questions. So this is a fairly simple one. Alright, I'm going to fast forward and show you what it looks like. I've fast forwarded and now I have all this implemented. I'm going to read in. Here's a sample input file. There's five. You notice there's 5 questions, and when I run it, it should look like the sample output I have here. And sure enough, I can see that I have my essay question, and it is 5 blank lines long to allow me to write something in. I have 4. Then the next one's a multiple choice with 4 answers. The next one's an essay with 5 blank lines. This next one's an essay with 3 blank lines. 1, 2, 3. And the last one's a multiple choice with 3 answers. The last thing I'd like to point out is you'll be turning in 4 files for this particular lab. Test question 7c, essay, multi-choice, and run test. This concludes Lab 7c. Thanks for watching.